He arrived honking as if the world belonged to him. It was a sharp, prolonged sound that sliced through the late afternoon like a siren of arrogance. First one honk, then two short ones, and then another long one, as if he were summoning an audience. I flinched at the noise, dropping the teaspoon in the sink. The metal clattered against the ceramic with a dry snap. For a second, I thought it was a lost car trying to find the wrong house number. But then came the roar. Deep, thunderous. The kind of sound that doesn't ask for permission. It imposes presence. The engine echoed through the neighborhood's walls as if it were trying to tell a story before any door opened. I approached the window with a lump in my throat. And that's when I saw it. A red Mustang. It gleamed as if it had just rolled out of the dealership. The setting sun reflected off the hood like liquid gold. Chrome wheels, a sunroof, custom license plate, J-Man. Seriously, J-Man. As if he were some misunderstood Marvel superhero. And my dad was already out there. I didn't even see when he passed me. Maybe he had run out the back door, maybe he had teleported, I wouldn't know. All I know is he was on the sidewalk, arms raised, eyes wide with admiration, smiling like a child on Christmas Day. "Rachel, look at this machine. What do you think, huh? Gorgeous, right? Huh?" His joy cut through my stomach like glass. That happiness, it was sincere. Exaggerated, but sincere. As if something had finally gone right. As if that car symbolized redemption. Hope. The future. And then the driver's door opened. Slowly. Choreographed. As if the universe had pressed the slow motion button just for him. James stepped out of the car with the confidence of someone who had never failed. He wore a black leather jacket, dark jeans, brand new white sneakers. His stubble was strategically trimmed. He took off his sunglasses like someone revealing a veil of mystery and looked around as if expecting applause. And then he spoke, loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. "Gift from the old man. What do you think, huh? Well deserved, right?" He laughed, a grin full of teeth and self-assurance. And then he tossed the key in the air, caught it like a magician finishing his trick, and winked at me. I couldn't answer. The words refused to leave my mouth. My chest tightened as if an invisible hand was strangling me from the inside out. My throat was dry. My vision blurred. The sound around me started to muffle. It was like being submerged in warm water, numb, slow. I forced a smile. Weak. Shaky. An automatic gesture from someone who had learned to mask discomfort with politeness. But the truth? My head was spinning. That car, that model, those details. I knew the prices. I had researched cheaper used cars for my dad a while ago when he complained about knee pain and said driving the old car was uncomfortable. At the time, he rejected any idea of trading it in. And now, a brand new Mustang? Paid in full? It didn't make sense. Not with his pension being tight. Not with my mom's alimony. Not with the debts I'd been helping to pay. It made no sense. Unless... The thought hit me like an avalanche. The bill. My bill. My heart raced. My hands sweated. I took 2 steps back, never taking my eyes off the car, as if it were a wild animal ready to pounce. I turned and walked slowly inside, trying to keep my composure. But as soon as I crossed the door, I ran. I raced up the stairs as if I were fleeing a fire. I entered the old guest room, closed the door, and leaned against it, breathing heavily. I grabbed my phone. I unlocked the banking app with trembling hands. I felt the sweat dripping down my palm. I tapped on the savings account. That account, 7 years of depositing everything I had left, every work bonus, every tax refund. That account was my quiet pride. No one except me knew how much I had sacrificed to keep that number growing. And now? 0. I couldn't believe it. My stomach churned, my vision blurred. I took a deep breath and opened the statement. The transactions were all there. A sequence of scheduled transfers, all in my name. Made in the early hours of the morning, at different times, but always at the daily limit. In 2 days, everything had vanished. Almost $70,000. Swept away. And the most infuriating part? They were all with facial authentication. supposedly mine. Those transactions had passed through two-step verification, but I never approved anything. I never opened the app at those times. I never received notifications. It was as if someone had become me. My first reaction was denial. I started thinking of scenarios, cloning, hackers, but everything seemed too internal. The times, the amounts, the details, it was all too familiar. And then it hit me. Someone had accessed my phone or used my documents, or worse, someone in my family. My body froze. My fingers tingled. I remembered a day, 2 months ago, when my mom said she had mixed up the health plan registration and asked for a photo of my ID. Just as a precaution, she said. It's good to have everything here in case anything happens. At the time, I thought it was harmless. Now it felt like a plan. Outside, I heard James laughing loudly with some neighbor. It still smells brand new, man. Sit down and take it for a spin later, he said. It was like hearing a knife being sharpened. I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking uncontrollably. The car was there, parked in front of the house. Shiny, proud. And I knew with every cell of my body that it had been bought with my money. Money I had saved with fear. Money born from exhaustion. Money that was my safety. And theirs. And now, it was on red wheels. But what I didn't know yet, and what would truly break me, was how they had done it without my authorization. And when I finally found out, I realized the betrayal ran deeper than I could have imagined. The next day, I went to my parents' house. The sky was cloudy, as if the weather had sensed my mood. The street seemed quieter than usual. Or maybe it was just my mind, too deep in the whirlwind of thoughts to notice the sounds around me. Each step toward the porch felt like it weighed a ton. I didn't know exactly what I expected to hear from them, but what I found was worse than any answer. The front door was unlocked, as always. I walked in. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, and for a moment, I felt like a child again. But that feeling was crushed almost instantly by the bitter taste of memory. The empty account, the red car, my brother's smile, my father's laugh. All of it still echoed in my head like a series of cursed scenes. I slowly entered the kitchen. My parents were sitting at the table as if it were just another Saturday. The coffee machine was dripping in the background. My mother was reading a store flyer. My father was biting into a toast with strawberry jam. Both calm, serene, complicit. James wasn't there. Maybe he was driving around in the new Mustang. Maybe showing it off around town like a stolen trophy. I stood there for a moment, watching them. That domestic scene almost made me hesitate. But I couldn't. Not after what they had done. I took a deep breath and blurted it out, without beating around the bush. You took my money. The sentence fell like a muffled thunder in the warm air of the kitchen. My mother didn't even flinch. She slowly placed the cup down on the saucer, unhurried, as if I had just commented on the weather. She looked at me with that calm, distant expression. The kind you only learn to decipher after years of being too close. Honey, we needed to help your brother. She said it as if the answer were obvious, as if his need justified any act, any sacrifice, even mine. James has huge potential, but the world never gave him a chance. My chest burned. I stepped closer to the table, swallowing hard. I felt the skin on my body tingle with indignation. My eyes, moist, but I stayed firm. You forged documents. This is a crime. My voice was low but firm, like an underground current about to burst. My mother lowered her gaze but said nothing. My father, on the other hand, tossed the napkin on the table with an impatient sigh and looked at me as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Rachel, please. You're overreacting. He laughed. A short, almost sarcastic laugh. You have a good job. He's trying. He needs encouragement. You, of all people, should understand. You, of all people. They saw me like that, as a piggy bank with legs, an emergency fund on the move. The daughter who figured it out on her own, so let her keep figuring it out. They had never said this out loud before. But now they didn't need to. It was clear, crystal clear. It wasn't about not knowing that this was wrong. They knew. But they decided to do it anyway. Because in their minds, it was the right way to go wrong. A mistake for the good of the family. But family in practice was just a nice word for James. My mother took a deep breath and tried to touch my hand on the table. I pulled away. She recoiled, her eyes moistening. But I no longer had space to yield. "You betrayed me," I whispered, "completely. And I don't regret anything I did for you. But now, you've gone too far." We three sat in silence. The kettle whistled on the stove. The shrill sound cut through the air like a warning. Right there, in that kitchen, everything broke. There was no turning back. Because betrayal can be forgiven. But trust, when it breaks, it shatters. It never becomes whole again. I stood up slowly, feeling my legs tremble. I grabbed my bag, gave them one last look, and walked toward the door. "If I want justice," I said aloud, more to myself than to them, "I'll have to go all the way." I stopped at the threshold. Even if that means destroying what's left of our family. And I closed the door behind me. What I still didn't know was that to prove the crime, I would have to face not only the law, but the weight of guilt, family pressure, and secrets that were yet to come. The bank was silent that morning, as if the air inside knew the gravity of what was to come. The floor shone with an almost artificial exaggeration, and the smell of coffee brewed hours ago lingered in the air. The cold lights reflected off metal surfaces, but none of them reflected the confusion inside me. I went straight to the service desk. Sweaty hands, a twisted stomach, but a steady gaze. "I need copies of the documents used for the most recent withdrawals from this account," I said, sliding the account number and my ID through the acrylic divider. The attendant looked at me as if hesitating for a second, maybe weighing whether this would cause a problem. But she typed something into the computer and then called the manager. That's when he appeared. Mr. Halliday. A graying man with a serene voice and gentle manners. He had always been courteous the few times I had needed to speak with him, like when I needed to authorize a limit increase or transfer larger sums. But that day, he looked at me differently, with an uncomfortable pity in his eyes, as if he already knew everything. He invited me to a small, more private room in the back. "Wait a moment, Rachel. I'll get the paperwork for you," he said in a low voice, as if speaking to a widow just back from the funeral. A few minutes later, he returned. He was carrying a thin, transparent plastic folder. Inside, 5 stapled sheets and a transaction form. My heart raced. When he extended the folder to me, he hesitated for a brief moment. "I'm so sorry. Truly." I took the folder carefully, as if it were radioactive evidence. My eyes scanned the first page. A withdrawal authorization with my supposed signature at the bottom. But it took just one glance, one single glance. That signature was not mine. The R of my name didn't have that odd curve. My A never had that little dot at the end. And the way they wrote my last name, it was almost right. Almost. But the handwriting had hesitations, as if whoever wrote it was copying from somewhere. I moved on to the next page. A false power of attorney, also supposedly signed by me, allowing complete access to the account. That paper, if accepted as legitimate, would give anyone unrestricted access to the money I had built up over 7 years. And right there, at the top, were my details. My CPF, my address, everything in order, everything real, except for the signature. It was like being punched in the stomach without warning. I felt a knot rise in my throat. My face started to heat up, and I blinked a few times to push back the tears that insisted on forming. I knew they had used my money, but seeing how they did it, seeing how they went through the effort of forging something so intimate, so personal as my signature, it was a betrayal deeper than I expected. It was as if they had carefully peeled off my skin, only to put a fake mask over it. "I need a copy of all of this," I said, my voice trembling. "Of course," said the manager, and he walked away, leaving me alone for a few minutes. The folder in my hand seemed to weigh 3 times its normal weight. From there, I went straight to a law office. I didn't tell anyone. I just typed signature fraud bank account into my phone and chose the first name that came up with good reviews. I waited an hour to be seen, but I didn't leave the waiting room, not even to go to the bathroom. I couldn't. If I left, maybe I would give up. And I couldn't give up. The lawyer was a bald man in a dark gray suit with tired eyes. His name was Daniel Marquez. He listened to me in silence as I told him everything. About the car, the account, the withdrawal, the forged signature. He took the folder, read page by page, making small sounds of disapproval as he read. Finally, he let out a long sigh and took off his glasses. Rachel, this is serious. He rested his elbows on the table, interlaced his fingers, and looked deep into my eyes. We're talking about ideological falsehood, document fraud, and embezzlement. It's a solid case. I know, I replied. But it's your family. He hesitated. Are you sure you want to go ahead with this? That question hit me with an unexpected force, as if there was still doubt. But there wasn't. What they did to me was more than theft. It was a deliberate breaking of the trust I had spent a lifetime building. And the worst part? The certainty that I wouldn't do anything. That I would swallow it once again. That I, as always, would choose love, duty, loyalty. But something inside me had changed. It had broken. And what was left wouldn't accept the role of the useful daughter, the piggy bank with legs, the invisible presence that only shows up to save. I looked at the lawyer calmly. I didn't need to raise my voice, nor fill my eyes with tears. They already made me choose between love and dignity. This time, I choose the latter. He nodded, saying nothing more. That was enough. While he began filling out the forms, drafting the complaint, filing the lawsuit, I sat there, motionless, watching everything transform before my eyes. My family was now on paper, as defendants, and I as the complainant, the daughter who became the accuser, the heir who became a stranger. And, though it hurt more than any word could describe, there was a hint of relief in that chaos. As if, finally, someone was seeing the injustice I had been swallowing for years. But what I still didn't expect was that, even in the face of justice, even with proof, even with everything exposed, they wouldn't regret a single thing. And worse still, James would have something to say, something that would change everything again. The courtroom was nothing like in the movies. No grand wooden panels, no gavel banging with authority, no impassioned speeches filled with poetic justice. It was a beige concrete building with worn-out carpets, the smell of stale air conditioning, and a narrow corridor that seemed to lead more to a cold accounting meeting than a courtroom. In the hearing room, everything was functional, almost clinical. The fluorescent lights made the faces look pale. There was a clock on the wall that seemed to move slower just to heighten the tension. I sat at the front, close to my lawyer, trying to hold myself together. But my hands were cold. My throat, dry. My heart, a drum beating to the rhythm of war. My parents were on the other side of the room, heads bowed. They avoided my gaze as if I were a stranger. My father fidgeted with his fingers, nervous. My mother, motionless, with her hands clasped in her lap as if she were praying. But it wasn't for forgiveness. It was for the embarrassment of being there. And James didn't show up. No farewell, no explanation. Not even a text saying good luck. The son who had caused all of this, who received the car, who benefited from the fraud, had disappeared. When the judge entered, everyone stood up. The officer's voice echoed through the room, procedural, emotionless. Springfield District Court session commenced. My lawyer began to speak, firmly, without exaggeration. He presented the documents the bank had given me, comparing my real signature with the forged one. He showed the altered power of attorney. The account statement, with the withdrawals in sequence. The dates, the amounts. Everything perfectly linked. And I sat there, listening to every word, every sentence, as if I were watching my entire life pass through a scanner. It was surreal. A crime had been committed. But not by a stranger. Not by someone wearing a mask in a dark corner. It was done inside my own home. When they called my mother to testify, I froze. She stood slowly, with the same calm she had when making coffee on Sundays. She walked to the center of the room, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The judge looked at her with neutrality. The prosecutor started. Mrs. Helena, do you confirm that you authorized with these documents the withdrawal from the bank account registered in your daughter Rachel's name? She looked at the papers. For a second, I saw something waver on her face. Not guilt, but discomfort. Hurt pride. Then she raised her eyes and said softly, Rachel always saved this money, but she never said it was only hers. My breath stopped. That hurt more than any zeroed-out statement. More than the empty account. More than the red car on the sidewalk. She knew. She had always known. I had been talking about that account since I started saving the money. I called it the Family Emergency Fund. Emergency. Not a whim, not a gift. The prosecutor countered directly. You knew the money was your daughter's? Yes. The account is in her name. The bank confirms that only she had legitimate authorization to manage it. The documents presented were falsified. My mother looked at me at that moment, and what I saw in her eyes was not regret. It was sadness. Not for having done wrong, but because I was there. As if I were the one at fault for exposing what she preferred to keep hidden. Family is for helping each other, she said, in a low but firm voice. The words ricocheted inside me like a bullet. And in that second, everything made sense. They didn't see the mistake. They didn't see the theft. To them, the sin wasn't forging documents or meddling with my money. The sin was that I said no. It was that I broke the invisible pact of silent loyalty. To my parents, love meant obedience. It meant accepting everything quietly. It meant sacrificing myself in silence, with a smile on my face, while they chose who to love more. In their minds, I was the daughter who had made it, the one who didn't need anything, the one who had no children, no debts, who lived well. So, in the distorted logic they built, I owed. I owed to help. I owed to give in. I owed to donate. Always. And when I didn't, when I protected what was mine, I became the villain. After my mother's testimony, there wasn't much more to say. The judge already had everything in hand. The evidence was clear. The crime, undeniable. My father wasn't even called to speak. He remained silent the whole time, as if his pride didn't allow him to apologize. The judge spoke, in a firm and direct voice. Considering the evidence presented and the confirmation of the misuse of falsified documents, this court finds the defendants guilty. Absolute silence. The sentence will be converted into monetary compensation. The withdrawn amounts must be fully returned, with interest. The crime of forgery and the use of a false document is hereby recorded. Court adjourned. It was like that. Cold, technical, final. I stood up, grabbed my purse, looked at my parents one last time. They didn't say a word. My mother glanced at me briefly, her eyes filled with tears, but without the courage to stand up. My father simply lowered his head even more. And it was in that moment I knew. They didn't regret it. They were just embarrassed for having been caught. I left the courtroom without looking back. And what should have been a victory left me empty. I had won. Justice was on my side. But the silence that followed, the absence, the weight of knowing that my parents now saw me as the enemy, was worse than any defeat. And in the middle of that silence, James finally sent me a message. Just 2 words. Did you win? And that's when I realized the war still wasn't over. After the trial, the silence was absolute. No apologies, no attempts at conversation, no gestures of reconciliation. That house where I grew up, where I once thought I had roots, now seemed like an abandoned lot, emotionally deserted. The few messages I received from distant relatives were lukewarm, evasive. It's a shame things came to this point. You should talk to your mom. Family is important. No one asked how I felt. They only suggested I return to the place I left. The role of the good daughter who swallows her tears for the sake of harmony. But the worst part was James. 2 days after the trial, he posted a photo at a bar. He was with 2 friends whose names I could barely remember. He smiled with that same air of someone who never pays the bill but always orders the priciest item on the menu. A new t-shirt, sunglasses, a bottle of expensive whiskey on the table. The caption? Family is who stands by your side, always. My chest burned, my fingers froze on the screen, and for a second I wanted to respond, say everything, shout in the comments, expose the truth. But no, I just held the button and deleted his number. As if deleting it was like pulling out the last splinter wedged under my nail with tweezers. Life went on, but as if it were missing sound. I would come home from work, drop my bag on the floor, and stare at the emptiness of the living room. The off TV reflected my tired face. The plants on the balcony were dying, and I didn't care. I'd heat up whatever in the microwave, eat standing, looking out the window. It was like living in airplane mode. The restitution started to come in installments, cold, automatic. Each deposit left me bitter. It was mine, yes, hard-earned money, saved month by month for 7 years. But now, it tasted of shame. As if, to recover it, I had to sell something even more valuable, the illusion that I belonged to that home. I tried not to think, but at night, before falling asleep, the questions came. What if I had let it go? What if I had talked more? What if it really was my fault for saving so much without saying anything? But deep down, I knew. Love without respect becomes debt, one that never stops growing. Then, on a Saturday morning, when the sunlight hit the living room mirror and made me squint, I decided, I'm going to disappear. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because finally I gave myself permission to breathe without apologizing. I opened the laptop, went to a ticket website. I started typing without thinking. Lisbon, Barcelona, Rome. The list kept growing like a promise of a new life. I went to the bathroom, threw away some old things from the closet, started folding clothes. 2 pairs of pants, 3 t-shirts, a dress, a pair of comfortable sneakers, a hardcover book I had bought years ago and never read. And, before closing the suitcase, I wrote something. I took a plain sheet of paper from the drawer, a black pen, a steady hand. Love without respect is eternal debt, and I chose to stop paying. I folded the paper carefully, as if sealing a letter I might never send. I put it inside the suitcase, between the socks, next to the toothbrush. I did everything in silence, like someone about to leave the stage in the middle of a performance, not because of defeat, but because they understood their role there had ended. I took a taxi to the airport without telling anyone. I turned off the notifications on my phone. I didn't want to know if anyone would notice, if anyone would say something, if anyone in the end would feel my absence. In the boarding line, I felt the weight of the suitcase on my back, but for the first time, it felt light inside. As the plane taxied on the runway, an elderly lady next to me commented, excited, "First time in Europe?" I looked out the window. The sky was starting to open up in a shy blue hue. "First time in myself," I replied, with a smile I hadn't recognized in a long time. She didn't understand, of course, but she smiled back kindly. And when the plane took off, I felt something inside me detach, as if finally the air began to circulate in my lungs, guilt-free. It was far from there, between alleyways of ancient stones, cafes smelling of fresh bread, and conversations in languages I barely understood, that for the first time I began to recognize myself. And more importantly, I started to forgive myself. Lisbon had a lighter sky. The soft light of the late afternoon seemed to caress the stone streets, and I, who had once felt like a burden, now saw myself as part of the surroundings. The air was fresh, the breeze came from the sea, and everything around me seemed more peaceful. It was as if the world was inviting me to breathe deeply for the first time in years. With each step through the narrow streets of Alfama, a weight began to lift from me. I could feel my bones easing, as if Lisbon had the power to reset my soul. I was there without haste, without maps, without a destination. There were no schedules or commitments. Just me, a city that didn't judge me, and an inner silence I never knew existed. In Barcelona, things changed even more. The city vibrated with a constant music, pulsing to the rhythm of the heart. The streets, with their modernist buildings and the noise of tourists, made life feel more intense. But what touched me most about Barcelona was the feeling that, amidst the chaos, I could find myself. The quick conversations in cafes, the Latin rhythms, and the voices blending in the air taught me that life didn't have to be perfect to be lived authentically. It was in Barcelona that I met Clara. I was in a cafe at Plaça de Catalunya, sitting at a table with a strong coffee in hand, watching people rush by. When she approached, it felt like one of those casual encounters that turn out to be transformative. Clara was a psychologist, divorced, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen a lot. She asked if I would like to share the table, and we started talking as if we had known each other for a long time. "You seem a bit lost," she said, after a brief silence. "I've been there before. It's okay to be like this. But, sometimes we have to get lost to find ourselves, right?" I laughed awkwardly. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain that I was just trying to escape something I never really understood? Sometimes it feels like I've lived for everyone around me. I'm the daughter, the responsible one. But I was never me. And now, all I see are a bunch of pieces of myself that I don't know where I left. She looked at me for a while, as if measuring each word I said. "I understand. I've been through it. But you don't have to destroy your family, Rachel, to save yourself. Sometimes all we need to do is get out from under the rubble." Her words echoed inside me, like a gentle but firm touch. I had never considered the possibility of saving myself without having to sacrifice everything. As if for a while I had believed I had to destroy everything around me to find my own path. We became friends. Clara showed me a side of life I didn't know. We traveled for a few days. Barcelona, Madrid, Valencia. And every conversation with her felt like reclaiming a part of me I didn't even know I had lost. We talked about pain, about rebuilding, about the fragility of our choices. Clara helped me understand that loss didn't have to be a sentence. She taught me that there is strength in the cracks, that we can grow from what seems broken. One day, Clara suggested we go to Nazaré. The beach was famous for its giant waves and the tranquility the place offered. I, who had never been interested in beaches, agreed. She knew something I still didn't understand. We sat on the sand, with the sound of the sea muffling our words. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red, and Clara, with her attentive and calm gaze, simply let me be in silence. At that moment, something inside me shattered and, at the same time, reorganized itself. It was no longer about the loss of something, but about reconnecting with my own voice. I grabbed my notebook, the old one I had carried since childhood, and started writing. The words flowed from me as if they needed to be said there, at the edge of the sea, with the wind making the pages dance. I was the good daughter, responsible, invisible. Today, I'm just Rachel. And that's enough. Clara looked at me, but didn't say anything. She knew that in that moment, I was more whole than I had ever been. She just smiled, with the silent understanding of someone who had been through all of that before. I stayed there for a few more minutes, writing and rewriting those words. It was as if I could finally see myself in a mirror without fear. The identity of daughter that I had always carried, the expectations others had of me, no longer mattered. I was just Rachel, and that name, that simple name, was finally complete. I returned to the United States a month later, lighter, more alive, and somehow more whole. The trip hadn't been just about places. It had been about reconnecting with myself. I saw the world in a way I never imagined I could, and as much as there were still many scars, they were now healed. Not perfect, but whole. And there was something inside me that had changed forever. I knew I would never let myself get lost for someone else again. I would no longer be the daughter who erased herself, who hid, who sacrificed everything for others. I now had my own voice. I would never again let anyone make me believe that true love requires absolute sacrifice, because the love I deserved had to start with myself. I am Rachel Monroe, and this was the last time anyone made me believe that love is just pain. I chose freedom, and that now is all I need. And you, what would you do in my place? Sometimes life puts us in front of difficult decisions, decisions that not only affect our own path but also our closest relationships. When what we hold most dear fails us, when we are forced to choose between love and self-respect, what do we really choose? And when we finally decide for our freedom, how do we deal with the echoes of the past that keep following us? I know it's not easy. I know that often we have to make decisions that tear us apart inside. But maybe it's precisely in that moment that we are called to rebuild who we truly are. And Rachel's story is just a reminder that, in the end, the only person who can decide our fate is ourselves. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new journeys. I'd love to hear your opinion. See you in the next video.